In 2018, our city will commemorate its founding 300 years ago. In celebration, WYS presents this Tricentennial Moment.
In December 1814, when Andrew Jackson arrived in New Orleans to defend the city from the British, he famously pledged to drive their enemies into the seas or perish in the effort. But to reach the majority French-speaking population, he needed a translator. He needed Edward Livingston, an old acquaintance from Congress who then represented New York City. Moving to New Orleans in 1804, Livingston established a successful law practice, married, and raised a family here. When the British invaded, Jackson recruited him as aide-de-camp, military secretary, interpreter, orator, spokesman, and confidential advisor upon all subjects. Livingston played a significant role at the Battle of New Orleans, even going as far as to convince the suspicious Major General to enlist the services of Jean Lafitte's Barratarians in fighting the British. In the following years, Livingston would represent Louisiana in the U.S. House and Senate, and would once again serve Andrew Jackson as U.S. Secretary of State from 1831 to 1833. He was also instrumental in the 1825 revision of the Louisiana Civil Code, which is based on French and Spanish laws, making it very unusual in the U.S. Livingston was also an active land speculator, most famously in the case of the New Orleans Batture, the disputed stretch of riverfront land along what is now the Central Business District. A long-running lawsuit eventually became the basis of a bitter and widely publicized personal feud between Livingston and former President Thomas Jefferson, who believed that the shorelines should belong to the public. Though he continued to fight for his private property rights into the 1830s, Livingston eventually agreed to a compromise that kept the riverfront land within the city of New Orleans as public property. In the final translation, Edward Livingston is regarded as one of the great lawyers and statesmen of the 19th century. I'm Tom Gregory, and this has been your New Orleans Tricentennial Moment.
WYS's New Orleans Tricentennial Moments are brought to you by the Miro Foundation and presented in association with the historic New Orleans Collection. In 2018, our city will commemorate its founding 300 years ago. In celebration, WYS presents this Tricentennial Moment.
Before meeting under its clock became a New Orleans shopping ritual, D.H. Holmes was the anchor of one of the most famous retail districts in the South. It started when Daniel Henry Holmes came to New Orleans in 1839 to open a dry goods store. 10 years later, in 1849, he opened his department store, D.H. Holmes, on Canal Street. And for 140 years, there was no place like Holmes for shoppers. He followed the model of pioneering department stores in Paris and New York City to offer his customers the best products and services. D.H. Holmes is widely believed to be the first to introduce store deliveries in New Orleans and the first to employ women as clerks. At the time of Holmes' death in 1898, the store was billed as the largest department store in the South, with more than 700 employees. D.H. Holmes underwent numerous expansions. In 1913, the original four-story Gothic building, designed by Charles Pride, gave way to a new, large, neoclassic design. Over the years, department store management insisted on lavishly decorated windows at Christmas, and at one point, Santa could be seen atop a balcony waving to passers-by. D.H. Holmes and its branch stores were purchased by retail giant Dillard's in 1989. And although the original store later became a hotel, the building and its clock remain local icons. Under the Clock at Holmes was the go-to meeting place, as immortalized in the opening scene of John Kennedy Toole's A Confederacy of Dunces. The place where generations met is remembered today by the statue of the curmudgeon, Ignatius J. Riley, the central character of the Pulitzer Prize-winning novel, who still stands, and I quote, waiting under the clock at D.H. Holmes' department store, studying the crowd of people for signs of bad taste in dress. I'm Tom Gregory, and this has been your New Orleans Tricentennial Moment.
WYS's New Orleans Tricentennial Moments are brought to you by the Miro Foundation and presented in association with the historic New Orleans Collection. In 2018, our city will commemorate its founding 300 years ago. In celebration, WYS presents this tricentennial moment.
On January 8, 1815, the outcome of the Battle of New Orleans was swayed, in part, due to the success and failure of two different engineering projects. The British and the Americans were dug into their positions. Literally, the British digging canals to float men and supplies, the Americans to build a defensive barrier and deepen the canal in front of it. Major General Andrew Jackson is building Line Jackson, his main defense against the seasoned British military.
Jackson and his men fortify the upriver bank of a drainage canal called the Rodriguez Canal.
Jackson saw it as a geographic line. So he got on the other side of it and started digging the canal out and sticking the mud on the other side. This wasn't just a little grass knoll. He built something serious, and he was building it the whole time. So as he built it, it became more and more difficult for the British to take it.
As the British were marching toward New Orleans, you had the river on one side, you had swamps on the other side. It was like a funnel of death that they were going into.
On the British side, General Edward Packenham orders a two-prong attack on Line Jackson. That includes having Colonel William Thornton's troops cross the Mississippi River and take the West Bank. The timing of Packengham's battle plan is crucial, as is the canal and the dam being constructed to bring the boats to the river for the midnight crossing.
Well, they dig this thing for days. They dig it out. And sure enough, they bring boats forward. They break the levee, the water comes in, the boats float up.
A cut through the levee that was intended to enable the British troop transports to carry the detachment to the West Bank, that canal collapsed. The engineers in charge of it just unfortunately did not get the job done.
So in a mad rush, they grab what boats they can, drag them up, throw them in the water, and now Thornton's left with 600 men instead of 1,400 men. Significant difference.
So there was a long delay in getting the detachment across the river to the West Bank.
The delay in getting Thornton's detachment across the river to the West Bank, as well as other failures in the implementation of Packengham's plan, doomed the British attempt to overtake Line Jackson. In the final and decisive battle of the War of 1812, the success of Jackson's earthen defense in Chalmette helped the young country weather an assault by a superior British force and kept New Orleans and the control of the Mississippi River under the American flag. I'm Tom Gregory, and this has been your New Orleans Tricentennial Moment.
WYS's New Orleans Tricentennial Moments are brought to you by the Miro Foundation and presented in association with the historic New Orleans Collection. In 2018, our city will commemorate its founding 300 years ago. In celebration, WYS presents this tricentennial moment.
It may be hard to believe, but the Battle of New Orleans was never actually fought in New Orleans. On January 8, 1815, when the battle-seasoned British Army, who outnumbered their foe more than 2-1, tried to advance to the city, the American forces, a cobbled-together band of warriors, decimated the invaders in one of the most one-sided victories in the War of 1812. The British would go no further than the front that was defined by the plantation-dotted landscape of what is now St. Bernard Parish. The sugar plantation of the well-respected Ignace du Chalmette was the brutal engagement's ground zero.
Chalmette plantation is the battlefield. And very early on, Jackson realizes the Chalmette plantation's a threat.
So General Jackson ordered that everything be destroyed that Chalmette had, because whether it was his house, his barns, his sugar mill, all of these things could have been used to compromise the American position. So that Chalmette understood this, and he understood that it was a necessary sacrifice.
But the extent and reality of this sacrifice was too much to bear.
Chalmette traveled to the plantation, saw everything destroyed, and it was more than he could live with. He returned home that night, had what was called then a fit of apoplexy, which today we would call a stroke, and died.
Chalmette's sacrifice was not unique among the families that lived and made their livings downriver from New Orleans.
What happened to Chalmette and to the Chalmette family was indicative of what happened throughout the region. Of all the major sugar planters in St. Bernard at the time of the Battle of New Orleans, most all of them were ruined and lost their plantations within 10 to 13 years of the battle.
But this collective triumph did set the course for the young and expanding country.
After the Louisiana Purchase, people had all these suspicions about Louisiana not being American enough. It's kind of ironic that the sense of our national pride came in large measure from the plains of Chalmette.
In defending New Orleans, the victory helped the United States maintain its independence and forge a new American identity. But it also forever changed the landscape and people of St. Bernard Parish. I'm Tom Gregory, and this has been your New Orleans Tricentennial Moment.
WYS's New Orleans Tricentennial Moments are brought to you by the Miro Foundation and presented in association with the historic New Orleans Collection.